Welcome back to Beneath the Long Man's Feet. I've got a story for you for this episode, but it's not one of my stories for a change. It's a story by a wonderful storyteller called Gary Brienholt, and it's called The 12 Riddles, and it is one of my favourite short stories. So the 12 Riddles, it goes like this. Once upon a time in these Isles of Albion, there was a king who ruled fairly and justly for a very long time. But as the king grew older, he needed to pass the kingdom on to somebody else. But the king had no wife, no queen, and he had no children, no princes or princesses to hand the kingdom to. He had no brothers or sisters, so no nieces or nephews to hand the kingdom to. No living relatives which to pass the kingdom on to. No king to follow him. And a kingdom without a king isn't really a kingdom, is it? So the king devised the 12 Riddles of Albion, and he decreed that whoever answered the 12 riddles first would be his heir. And so princesses and princes from other realms came to the court to try and answer the 12 riddles. But try as they might, they were unsuccessful. Lords and ladies of the king's court came, and one by one, in their finery, they tried to answer the 12 riddles. But not one of those lords or ladies could answer any of the riddles. The great thinkers of the land came, philosophers and inventors, and despite their keen minds, not one of them could answer the 12 riddles. The church decided that they would answer the riddles and so become king of the land, and so they set a congress of bishops together to answer the 12 riddles and work out who amongst them would be the king. But despite their learning and their knowledge and all their prayers, they could not answer the 12 riddles of Albion. The king decreed that any man from across the land who could answer the 12 riddles would be the next heir. And so, for the next few years, people came from all over to try and answer the 12 riddles. And every single one of them walked away unsuccessful. The riddles remained unanswered. The king grew weary. And moreover, the king grew old, and it began to look like he would indeed have to hand the kingdom over to nobody. And one day, as he was in his castle looking out of his window, he saw a commotion going on at the palace gates, the castle gates. And there was an odd-looking fellow. I say odd, probably not odd to you and me. He had a leather hat and a tattered coat of many colours and a leather satchel across his shoulder. He had strong, dusty walking trousers on and stout but well-worn walking boots, and he carried a walking stick, a cane. And he looked for all the world like he'd been travelling for a very, very long time. And in fact, this is exactly what he had been doing. This was Jack, and Jack had been travelling these lands of Albion for the past few years, and he now knew the answer to the 12 riddles and was trying to go to see the king. But the palace guards would not let him through the gates. No way a vagabond like him could possibly know the answer. No way, when the finest minds in the country, princes and princesses and lords and ladies had tried, no way could he know the answer, and they were not going to let him in to waste the king's time. But the argument went on for a little while until the chamberlain came out of his rooms and took Jack aside so that the guards could continue with their business. But the chamberlain had much the same view as the guards. He said, "Jack, look at you. Do you really think you know the answer to the 12 riddles? The finest minds in this kingdom have tried and failed. The finest minds from other kingdoms have tried and failed. I am the king's closest advisor, and I don't know the answer to the 12 riddles. What makes you think you do, Jack? Now my advice is you to walk away here now peacefully before I get the soldiers to run you out of town." At that moment the king came into the chamberlain's room and called Jack over, and he nodded to the chamberlain. And he said to Jack, "I've been hearing you, Jack. You claim to know the answer to the 12 riddles of Albion. Well, know this, if you know the answers, then yes, indeed, you will be my heir. But if you do not know the answers, then you are messing me about, and then I will throw you in jail for wasting my time, the time of my chamberlain, and the time of my palace guards. Do you understand, Jack? That seems like a fair exchange, my Lord King, said Jack. Okay then, Jack. Here then are the 12 riddles. Who are the 12 and where do they sleep? Who are the 11 and for whom do they wait? Who are the 10 and when did they arrive? Who are the 9 and why are they cursed? What are the 8 and when do they turn? What are the 7 and by whom are they worn? Who are the 6 and with whom do they ride? Who are the 5 and where do they live? What are the 4 and whose gift were they? What are the 3 and where do they land? What are the 2 and where do they stand? Who is the 1 and where does he sit? Now, Jack, it is your turn. Not hard to answer, my Lord King. The answer to the 12 riddles is this. Who are the 12 and where do they sleep? The 12 sleepers of Alderley Edge, Arthur and his knights, waiting for England's call. And who are the 11? And for whom do they wait? They are the 11 horses sleeping with those knights, and they wait for the 12th to make up their number. What are the 10 and when did they arrive? The 10 legions of Rome that arrived in AD 43, and things have never been the same here ever since. And who are the 9 and why are they cursed? Well, they are the 9 standing stones of Stanton Drew, 9 ladies of Stanton Moor, 9 maidens of Bodmin cursed for merely dancing on the Sabbath day. What are the 8 and when do they turn? The 8 spokes of the wheel of the year, and they turn with the seasons. And they are Yule and Imbolc and Ostara, Beltane, Autumn Equinox, Summer Solstice, Lunasa and Samhain. And what are the 7 and by whom are they worn? They are the 7 tines of the antlered crown worn by Canonas, lord of these lands. And who are the 6 and with whom do they ride? They are the 6 hounds of the wild hunt, and with Herne the hunter do they ride. And who are the 5 and where do they live? They are the 5 companions of Robin Hood, and they live with him in Sherwood Forest. And they are Friar Tuck, Little John, Will Scarlet, Maid Marian, and Much the Miller's son. And what are the 4 and whose gifts were they? They are the 4 staves of the Ogham, gifted by Ogma, the sun-faced bringer of wisdom. Each stave with 15 cuts, making 20 Ogham characters in all. And what are the 3 and where did they land? The 3 rays of the sun, the 3 rays of the Arwen, the 3 drops of inspiration from Ceridwen's cauldron, and on Gwionbach's thumb did they land. And what are the 2 and where do they stand? The twin poles of the Dodman, who stands on Wilmington Hill still. And who is the 1 and where does he sit? And at this point Jack looked the king directly in the eye and said, I am the 1, just as you were the 1 before me, and your father was the 1 before you, and my children will be the ones after me. I am the 1, and I sit there. And he pointed at the king's throne. And the king laughed. Jack was right. He had to admit Jack was not wrong. Jack had answered all 12 riddles correctly, and now the kingdom had an heir. So that was the 12 riddles, or the 12 riddles of Albion, as I like to call them. And I love that story because it brings together some of the myths of these Isles of Albion of ours, including, you notice, a reference to the Long Man of Wilmington, that chalk figure that's so dear to me. So if you like that story, or any of the other stories that I tell, drop me a line on my Facebook page or my YouTube channel, Beneath the Long Man's Feet. It's always good to hear from you. But until then, my friends, I bid you hail and farewell.